For 3 years, the top floor of Mercy Grace Hospital in Boston remained in absolute silence. The tinted windows prevented curious onlookers from seeing what happened inside, but everyone knew it was where Olivia Blackwood, the only daughter of one of America's most influential tech entrepreneurs, lay in a coma. The room, equipped with cutting-edge technology and monitored 24 hours a day, housed not just a patient, but the desperate hope of a father who refused to accept the silent outcome that medicine predicted. William Blackwood had built his empire from nothing, transforming a small startup into Blackwood Technologies, a Fortune 500 company with headquarters overlooking Boston Harbor. He had conquered everything he set his mind to, except the power to wake his daughter from her endless sleep. Olivia had suffered a sudden accident during a skiing trip in Aspen. No visible physical trauma, but a brain injury that plunged her into a vegetative state. Throughout this time, William moved mountains to keep his daughter alive. He brought specialists from abroad, tried experimental therapies, and financed an exclusive medical team to keep her function stable. Every resource was at his disposal, except for time, which was running out day by day, along with the faith of those around him. "Mr. Blackwood, these readings haven't changed in months," Dr. Abigail Matthews said gently, tablet in hand, as she stood beside Olivia's bed. The young woman lay still, her chest rising and falling with mechanical precision, her once vibrant features now serene and unchanging. William didn't look up from his daughter's face. His own had aged a decade in 3 years, deep lines etched around eyes that rarely slept. "Then find something that will change them," he said simply. It wasn't a request. In William Blackwood's world, it was as good as an executive order. Dr. Matthews sighed. "We've consulted with every neurologist on the eastern seaboard. The experimental treatment from Switzerland showed no—" "Then find someone from the western seaboard," William interrupted, finally looking up. "Or Japan or Antarctica. I don't care where they come from if they can help her." His hand never left Olivia's, as though letting go might sever whatever tenuous connection remained between them. Dr. Matthews nodded and left the room silently. The medical staff had learned that arguing with William Blackwood was futile. His wealth had secured the entire top floor of Mercy Grace Hospital, transformed into a state-of-the-art long-term care facility for one patient only. Outside the window, Boston's skyline sparkled with evening lights, a view Olivia had once loved but couldn't see anymore. Meanwhile, across the city in Dorchester, life followed a very different course. 10-year-old Ethan Reynolds sat on the fire escape outside the small apartment he shared with his mother, Sarah. His pencil moved across his sketchpad with surprising precision for someone his age, capturing the sunset over the neighborhood's crowded buildings. The Reynolds lived in a modest apartment complex where Sarah worked double shifts as a nurse's aide to make ends meet. Ethan was a quiet, observant boy who spent his afternoons drawing scenes he saw in the streets, unaware of what he might do with his sketches. He attended the local public school and dreamed of becoming someone who fixes people, as he put it to his mother. Few people paid much attention to Ethan, except for Ms. Parker, his 5th-grade teacher. Something about the boy's drawings had caught her eye, not just their technical skill, which was remarkable for his age, but the empathy evident in each stroke. The way he captured emotions in the faces of strangers showed a sensitivity beyond his years. "These are really special, Ethan," Ms. Parker said one afternoon, flipping through his sketchbook while the other children filed out for recess. "Have you ever thought about becoming an artist?" Ethan shrugged, his eyes downcast as always. "I want to fix people," he said softly, "like doctors do." Ms. Parker smiled. "Well, there are many ways to heal people. Some doctors use medicine, but art can heal in its own way too." She handed the sketchbook back to him. "That's why I've put your name down for the hospital field trip next week. Would you like to see how a real hospital works?" For the first time that day, Ethan's eyes lit up. He nodded eagerly. That evening, as Sarah Reynolds heated up leftover pasta for dinner, Ethan showed her the permission slip. Sarah looked it over with tired eyes. Her scrub still bore stains from her shift. "At the nursing home." "Mercy Grace, that's the fancy place downtown," she said, surprised. "I didn't know public schools took trips there." Ms. Parker says they have an educational program, Ethan explained, watching his mother hopefully. Sarah's pen hesitated over the signature line. I don't know, honey, that place, it's not for people like us. She didn't add that she'd once applied for a job there and been rejected without an interview. It's just a field trip, Mum, Ethan said quietly, and Miss Parker said I should go. She says I have healing hands. Sarah looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw something in his expression that made her sign the form. Healing hands, she repeated with a small smile. Your grandmother used to say the same thing about you. She didn't elaborate, and Ethan didn't ask. He simply added the signed form to his carefully organized folder, a small smile playing on his lips. Across the city, William Blackwood sat in the dimly lit hospital room, a laptop open on the table beside him, as he continued to run his business empire from his daughter's bedside. The soft beeping of machines provided a rhythm to his typing. A knock at the door interrupted his work. Come in, he called, not looking up. Dr. Matthews entered with a younger doctor beside her. Mr. Blackwood, this is Dr. Nathaniel Chen from Stanford. He specializes in consciousness disorders and has some new approaches we'd like to discuss. William stood, shaking the man's hand firmly. Whatever it costs, he said, before Dr. Chen could even speak. If you need equipment, staff, facilities, name it. Dr. Chen exchanged a glance with Dr. Matthews. Mr. Blackwood, I should be clear that what I'm proposing isn't a miracle cure. It's a new protocol for neural stimulation that has shown promising results in similar cases, but you've seen improvement, William finished for him. Dr. Chen nodded cautiously. In approximately 18% of cases, yes, minimal improvement. William turned to Olivia, her face peaceful in the soft light. Her dark hair spread across the pillow like a fan, regularly trimmed by a stylist who came weekly. Everything about her, care was meticulous, from the classical music played during certain hours to the daily physical therapy that prevented muscle atrophy. 18% is 18% more than zero, William said. When do we start? As the doctors discussed logistics, none of them noticed the slight fluctuation in one of the brain activity monitors, a tiny spike that settled back to baseline within seconds. If they had, they might have paid more attention to the date. In exactly 1 week, everything would change when a quiet boy with a sketchpad would walk through the hospital doors. And for the first time in 3 years, the silence on the top floor would be broken. The yellow school bus pulled up to the circular driveway of Mercy Grace Hospital, its brakes squealing as it came to a stop. 24 fifth graders pressed, their faces against the windows, eyes wide at the gleaming glass building that rose 15 stories into the Boston skyline. All right, everyone, Ms. Parker called over the excited chatter. Remember our rules. Stay with your buddy, follow instructions, and no wandering off. She gave a pointed look at the 2 boys who had disappeared during their last field trip to the Science Museum. This is a working hospital with real patients. Ethan sat quietly in the back, sketchbook clutched to his chest. He hadn't been assigned a buddy. The class had an odd number of students, and no one had volunteered to pair with the quiet boy who rarely spoke. Ms. Parker noticed and made her way down the aisle. You'll be my special assistant today, Ethan, she said with a warm smile. That means you'll help me make sure everyone follows the rules. Ethan nodded, grateful but still nervous. He'd never been inside a real hospital before, only the small clinic where he got his yearly checkups. The class filed out of the bus in an uneven line, their excited voices echoing in the circular driveway. At the entrance, a woman in a navy blazer waited with a clipboard and a practiced smile. Welcome to Mercy Grace Hospital. I'm Jessica Thompson, the Community Outreach Coordinator. Who do we have visiting today? Ms. Parker stepped forward. 5th grade from Dorchester Elementary. We're very grateful for this opportunity. Jessica's smile brightened. We love having young visitors. Many of our doctors and nurses decided on their careers after tours, just like this one. She led them through the sliding glass doors into a lobby that seemed to stretch forever. All marble floors and soaring ceilings. The children gawked at the massive sculpture in the center, a series of intertwined hands reaching upward toward a sphere that represented healing. This is so fancy, whispered a girl near Ethan. My mum said people pay thousands of dollars just to stay one night here. Ethan didn't respond, but his eyes took in everything. The way the light fell through the atrium windows, the purposeful walk of doctors in white coats, the hushed tones of families in the waiting areas. His fingers itched to draw it all. Jessica led them first to a mock operating room set up for educational purposes, where the children could handle real surgical tools and see the equipment doctors used. Next came the radiology department, where a technician showed them X-rays and let them see the massive MRI machine. It's like a spaceship, one boy exclaimed, and everyone laughed. Throughout the tour, Ethan remained at Ms. Parker's side, observing more than participating. When they reached the pediatric floor, decorated with bright murals and equipped with a playroom, some of the tension left his shoulders. Here, children in hospital gowns played games or watched television, their IV poles decorated with stickers and ribbons. A young patient in a wheelchair challenged one of Ethan's classmates to a video game, and soon a small crowd gathered to watch. Let's move on to our next stop, Jessica announced after 15 minutes. We'll be visiting the rehabilitation center, where patients work with therapists to regain their strength and abilities. The group followed her to the elevators. We'll go to the 8th floor, Jessica said, pressing the button. That's where our outpatient rehabilitation services are located. The elevator doors opened, and the children piled in, Jessica and Ms. Parker bringing up the rear. In the shuffle, an older woman in scrubs slipped in beside them. Excuse me, she said to Jessica. Are you heading to 14? Jessica shook her head. 8th floor for the tour group. The woman nodded and pressed the button for the 14th floor herself. As the elevator ascended, Ethan noticed the woman's ID badge, Dr. Eleanor Reed, Neurology. She caught him looking and gave him a tired smile. The elevator stopped at the 8th floor and most of the class exited. As Ethan moved to follow, he felt a strange sensation, like a gentle tug urging him to stay put. Before he could process the feeling, the doors were closing, and he found himself still in the elevator with Dr. Reed. Panic flashed across his face as he realized he'd been separated from his class. Oh, Dr. Reed exclaimed, quickly pressing the door open button, but it was too late. The elevator had already begun its ascent. Don't worry, she assured him, noting his distress. We'll go right back down. Which floor was your group on? 8, Ethan managed to say, his voice barely audible. Dr. Reed nodded and pressed the button. I'm sorry about that. Are you interested in medicine? She asked, trying to put him at ease. Ethan nodded. I want to fix people, he said softly. Something in his tone made Dr. Reed look at him more closely. That's a wonderful goal, she replied. What's your name? Ethan Reynolds. The elevator stopped at the 14th floor and the doors opened. Well, Ethan Reynolds, since we're here, would you like to see something special before we head back down? This is where our long-term care patients stay. It's usually off limits. Tours, but she hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. I think you might appreciate it. Against his better judgment, Ethan followed Dr. Reed off the elevator. This floor was noticeably different, quieter with softer lighting and a hushed atmosphere. We have patients here who have been with us for months or even years, Dr. Reed explained in a low voice. Some are waiting for specialized treatments. Others are recovering from severe injuries. She led him down a corridor where each room had a large window facing the nurse's station, allowing staff to monitor patients constantly. Most doors were closed, but through the windows Ethan could see still forms in beds surrounded by machines. They stopped at a junction where 2 hallways met. The north wing is restricted, Dr. Reed said, pointing to a set of double doors with a keypad lock. That's our VIP section, She was interrupted by her pager beeping loudly. Checking it, her expression changed. I'm needed urgently. Listen, Ethan, take the elevator back to the 8th floor. It's just around that corner. Your teacher is probably worried sick. With that, she hurried away, leaving Ethan alone in the quiet hallway. He turned to find the elevator as instructed, but as he passed the restricted wing, he noticed one of the double doors was slightly ajar. Curiosity overcame his natural caution. Glancing around to ensure no one was watching, he slipped through the opening. This corridor was even quieter than the rest. with only the soft hum of machinery breaking the silence. The lighting was dimmer, creating a peaceful atmosphere. Unlike the other rooms, these had no observation windows, only closed doors with small digital panels beside them displaying patient vital signs. Ethan moved slowly, drawn forward by something he couldn't explain. At the end of the hall stood a door like all the others, but as he approached, a strange feeling washed over him. The same inexplicable pull he'd felt in the elevator, only stronger now. The digital panel beside this door showed steady patterns. Heartbeat, blood pressure, brain activity, all stable but minimal. Ethan placed his hand on the door handle and finding it, unlocked, gently pushed it open. The room inside was spacious and elegant, more like a luxury hotel suite than a hospital room. Flowers filled crystal vases on various surfaces, their scent perfuming the air. Soft classical music played from hidden speakers, and in the center, on a hospital bed surrounded by state-of-the-art medical equipment, lay a young woman. Ethan stepped closer, drawn by a force he couldn't resist. She appeared to be sleeping peacefully, her dark hair spread across the pillow, her skin pale but perfect. Various tubes and wires connected her to the machines that beeped softly around her. A chart at the foot of her bed read, "Olivia Blackwood," in neat medical handwriting. Without thinking, Ethan reached out and touched her hand. It was cool, but not cold. Soft, but unresponsive. He stood there, holding the stranger's hand, overcome by an inexplicable sadness. "You've been alone for a long time," he whispered, though he had no way of knowing this. In the quiet room, with sunshine filtering through partially drawn blinds, time seemed to stand still. Something compelled Ethan to open his sketchbook. Balancing it on the edge of the bed, he began to draw Olivia, not as she appeared now, still and silent, but as he somehow knew she must have been, laughing, eyes bright with life, hair blowing in an imagined wind. His pencil moved swiftly, across the paper, capturing a vitality that was nowhere visible in the room. He was so absorbed in his drawing that he didn't hear the approaching footsteps until they were right outside the door. Panicking, Ethan closed his sketchbook and looked for somewhere to hide, but it was too late. The door swung open, and a tall man in an expensive suit stood frozen in the doorway, his expression changing from surprise to confusion to anger in the span of seconds. "Who are you?" William Blackwood demanded, his voice low but dangerous. "What are you doing in my daughter's room?" Before Ethan could answer, a security guard appeared behind Mr. Blackwood, followed by a flustered Jessica Thompson. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Blackwood," she said breathlessly. "He must have wandered away from the tour group. We've been searching all over for him." Ethan clutched his sketchbook to his chest, unable to speak as 3 sets of adult eyes fixed on him with varying degrees of concern and suspicion. "He's just a child," William said after a moment, his tone softening slightly as he studied Ethan's frightened face. "But this floor is restricted for a reason." He turned to Jessica. "Please ensure your security protocols are reviewed. Had this been someone with malicious intent?" He let the implication hang in the air. Jessica nodded vigorously. "Absolutely, Mr. Blackwood. I assure you this will never happen again." She reached for Ethan's shoulder. "Come along now, your teacher is worried sick." As Jessica guided him toward the door, Ethan cast one last glance at Olivia. For a split second, he thought he saw her eyelids flutter, but it must have been a trick of the light. The security guard escorted them to the elevator, maintaining a stern expression that made Ethan shrink into himself. The ride down to the lobby was silent and tense. In the lobby, Miss Parker was indeed frantic, speaking with hospital administrators while trying to keep the rest of the class calm. When she spotted Ethan, relief washed over her face, quickly followed by disappointment. "Ethan Reynolds, we've been searching everywhere for you." The other children stared, some with curiosity, others with the cruel delight that children sometimes take in seeing a classmate in trouble. "I'm sorry," Ethan whispered, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I got lost." It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. Something about that room, about Olivia, had called to him in a way he couldn't explain even to himself. The remainder of the field trip was cancelled, much to the dismay of Ethan's classmates. On the bus ride back to school, no one sat near him. Even Ms. Parker seemed distant, her usual warmth dimmed by concern and lingering fear over what could have happened. Ethan opened his sketchbook and stared at the drawing he'd made, Olivia as she might have been, full of life and joy. The image seemed to have come from somewhere beyond his imagination, as though his hands had accessed a memory that wasn't his own. Back on the 14th floor, William Blackwood returned to his daughter's bedside, troubled by the security breach, but distracted by an urgent business matter that required his attention. He settled into the familiar chair beside Olivia's bed, opened his laptop, and was soon absorbed in a video conference with executives from around the globe. He didn't notice the slight change in the pattern on one of the monitors, a small, almost imperceptible increase in brain activity that would have been dismissed as a glitch by most observers. The night passed uneventfully. Dr. Matthews arrived early the next morning for her regular assessment of Olivia's condition. She checked the overnight logs, reviewed the latest readings, and was about to begin her physical examination when something unusual caught her eye. "That's strange," she murmured, adjusting her glasses as she examined the brain activity readout more closely. She compared it to yesterday's readings, then to the baseline that had remained virtually unchanged for 3 years. There was definitely a difference, slight but unmistakable. "Nurse Miller," she called to the nurse who was changing Olivia's IV bag. "When did these readings change?" The nurse came over to look. "I didn't notice any change, doctor. Everything seemed stable during my shift." Dr. Matthews frowned and pulled up the continuous monitoring data on the computer. Scrolling back through the previous day's recordings, she pinpointed the exact moment when the change had begun, 2:14 p.m., lasting for approximately 3 minutes, before settling into a new pattern that, while still indicative of a comatose state, showed marginally more activity than before. "Who was in the room at 2:14 yesterday?" she asked, more to herself than to the nurse. "Mr. Blackwood usually arrives around 4, and I wasn't here until evening," Nurse Miller replied. "There was that security incident with the child from the school tour, but I don't know what time that happened." Dr. Matthews made a note to check the security footage. It was probably nothing, perhaps a response to a change in medication or a random fluctuation, but in Olivia's case, any change was significant. She completed her examination and was about to leave when another monitor beeped softly. Olivia's right index finger had moved, just a twitch, barely perceptible but definitely movement. Dr. Matthews stared in disbelief. In 3 years, Olivia had never shown voluntary motor response. "Did you see that?" she asked Nurse Miller, who nodded, equally stunned. "Get the neurologist on call," Dr. Matthews instructed, "and don't tell Mr. Blackwood yet. I don't want to give him false hope." By noon, a team of specialists had gathered in Olivia's room, each examining the data with cautious optimism. The finger movement had not repeated, but the change in brain activity persisted. Dr. Nathaniel Chen, who had only arrived from Stanford 2 days prior, studied the EEG readings with particular interest. "These patterns," he said, pointing to their specific wavelength. "They're consistent with what we see in patients beginning to emerge from minimally conscious states. It's subtle, but it's there." "After 3 years of no change?" Dr. Matthews asked skeptically. "What could have triggered it?" Dr. Chen shook his head. "Impossible to say with certainty. Sometimes there's no apparent trigger. The brain heals in mysterious ways, but a significant change in routine or environment can sometimes stimulate new neural pathways. Was there anything unusual yesterday?" The room fell silent as the medical team exchanged glances. Finally, Nurse Miller spoke up. "There was a boy who somehow got into her room, a child from a school tour." Dr. Chen's interest was piqued. "A child? Did he interact with the patient?" "Security found him here, but I don't know what happened before that," Nurse Miller replied. "The security footage might tell us more." While the doctors continued their discussion, a security officer was already reviewing yesterday's recordings at the request of William Blackwood, who wanted to understand exactly how a child had managed to breach their protocols. The officer fast-forwarded through hours of footage until he reached the relevant time frame. There was Ethan slipping through the partially open door, walking hesitantly down the corridor, entering Olivia's room. The officer continued watching, As the boy approached Olivia's bed, and then the officer leaned closer to the screen, reached out and took her hand. For exactly 14 seconds, the boy held Olivia's hand. Then he opened a sketchbook and began to draw. The officer checked the timestamp, 2:14 p.m. He made a note to include this detail in his report to Mr. Blackwood. When William arrived that afternoon, he was immediately ushered into a conference room where Dr. Matthews and Dr. Chen waited with carefully neutral expressions. "What's happened?" William demanded, his heart racing. After years of hoping for good news, he had learned to fear these impromptu meetings. "Mr. Blackwood," Dr. Matthews began cautiously, "we've detected some changes in Olivia's condition that we wanted to discuss with you." William's face remained impassive, but his hands gripped the edge of the table. "What kind of changes?" Dr. Chen stepped in. "There's been a slight increase in her brain activity since yesterday afternoon, and she exhibited a minor motor response, a finger movement, this morning." He paused, allowing William to process this information. "While we don't want to overstate the significance, these are the first measurable changes we've seen in 3 years. William's composure cracked, hope bleeding through the carefully maintained veneer of stoicism. "What does it mean? Is she waking up?" "It's far too early to say that," Dr. Matthews cautioned. "What we're seeing could be an anomaly, or it could be the beginning of something more significant. We need to continue monitoring and run additional tests before we can draw any conclusions." William nodded, struggling to contain his emotions. "What triggered it?" Dr. Chen exchanged a glance with Dr. Matthews before responding. "We can't be certain, but there was an incident yesterday that coincides with the timing of the initial change in brain activity." He hesitated. "The boy who entered Olivia's room, according to security footage, he held her hand for a brief period. The change in her readings began at precisely that moment." William stared at them, trying to process this information. "Are you suggesting that a random child somehow... what? Triggered something in my daughter that 3 years of the best medical care money can buy couldn't achieve?" His tone was incredulous, bordering on angry. "We're not suggesting anything definitive," Dr. Matthews assured him. "Correlation doesn't imply causation, but in cases like Olivia's, we have to consider every possibility, no matter how unlikely it might seem." William stood abruptly. "I want to see the footage." The security officer queued up the video in the conference room. William watched in silence as Ethan entered the room, approached Olivia's bed, and took her hand. Something about the boy's expression, a mixture of compassion and something deeper, almost like recognition, made William's chest tighten. When the security footage showed Ethan opening his sketchbook and beginning to draw, William leaned forward. "Can we see what he was drawing?" The security officer shook his head. "The angle doesn't show the sketchbook clearly, sir." William straightened, decision made. "Find him. I want to know who he is, where he lives, everything about him." Dr. Matthews looked concerned. "Mr. Blackwood, I understand your interest, but we need to be careful about involving a minor in—" "I'm not suggesting anything inappropriate," William interrupted. "But if there's even a remote possibility that this boy's presence had some effect on my daughter, I need to explore it. Wouldn't you, in my position?" No one could argue with that. Within hours, William's team had identified Ethan Reynolds, age 10, student at Dorchester Elementary School. They obtained his address and background information, discovering that he lived with his single mother, Sarah Reynolds, in a modest apartment in one of Boston's struggling neighborhoods. William debated how to approach them. Showing up unannounced with security personnel would likely frighten them, but the standard channels would take too long. In the end, he decided on a direct approach. The next morning, as Sarah prepared to leave for her early shift at the nursing home, a sleek black car pulled up outside their apartment building. The driver, a professionally dressed woman, approached Sarah as she locked her door. "Ms. Reynolds, I'm Emily Watson, assistant to William Blackwood. He would like to speak with you regarding a matter concerning your son, Ethan." Sarah's face paled. "What's happened? Is Ethan in trouble?" Emily smiled reassuringly. "Not at all. Mr. Blackwood simply wishes to discuss something that occurred during Ethan's school visit to Mercy Grace Hospital yesterday. He's waiting in the car and would be grateful for a few minutes of your time." Sarah hesitated, looking from the luxury vehicle to her watch. "I'm going to be late for work. I can't afford to lose this job." "Mr. Blackwood has already contacted your employer," Emily replied smoothly. "Your shift has been covered with no penalty to you." Sarah's expression hardened. "He did what? Without even asking me?" She drew herself up, protective instinct overriding intimidation. "I don't care how rich or powerful he is, he doesn't get to rearrange my life without my permission." Emily's professional demeanor cracked slightly, genuine understanding showing through. "You're absolutely right, Ms. Reynolds. It was presumptuous and I apologize on his behalf. But please understand, this is about his daughter. She's been in a coma for 3 years, and yesterday, after meeting your son, she showed the first signs of improvement. Mr. Blackwood is desperate, and desperate people don't always consider the proper protocols." Something in Emily's tone, the raw honesty beneath the polished exterior, made Sarah relent slightly. "Let me get Ethan. He should be part of any conversation concerning him." She turned back to the apartment, leaving Emily waiting in the hallway. Inside, she found Ethan already dressed for school, quietly eating cereal at their small kitchen table. "Ethan, honey," she said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing thoughts. "There's someone here who wants to talk to us about what happened at the hospital yesterday." Ethan looked up from his cereal, eyes wide with apprehension. "Am I in trouble?" Sarah stroked his hair reassuringly. "No, sweetie, but something happened yesterday with that woman you saw at the hospital. Her father wants to talk to us." Ethan's spoon clattered against the bowl. "She moved," he whispered. "I saw her finger move when I was leaving, but I thought I imagined it." Sarah stared at her son, unsure how to respond to this revelation. Before she could formulate a question, there was a gentle knock at the door. Emily stood waiting, her professional smile firmly back in place. Behind her, a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit approached. William Blackwood himself, looking both commanding and somehow vulnerable as he stood in the dingy hallway of the apartment building. "Ms. Reynolds," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for seeing me. I apologize for the intrusion and the presumption regarding your work schedule." His voice carried authority even when offering an apology. Sarah shook his hand briefly, acutely aware of the stark contrast between this powerful man and their humble surroundings. "Please come in," she said, stepping aside. "Though I warn you, it's nothing like what you're used to." William entered the small apartment, his gaze immediately finding Ethan at the kitchen table. Recognition flickered in his eyes. This was indeed the boy from the security footage. "Hello, Ethan," he said, his tone gentler than when addressing Sarah. "Do you remember me from yesterday?" Ethan nodded silently, still clutching his spoon like a lifeline. William took a seat at the kitchen table, somehow managing to look natural despite the incongruous setting. Emily remained standing by the door, a silent sentinel. "I understand you met my daughter yesterday," William began, watching Ethan carefully. "Olivia?" Ethan nodded again. "She looked lonely," he said softly, surprising both adults with his response. William's carefully composed expression faltered for a moment. "Yes," he admitted, "I suppose she has been lonely, even with me there every day." He leaned forward slightly. "Ethan, after you visited her room yesterday, something happened." Olivia showed signs of response for the first time in 3 years. Sarah gasped softly, her hand finding Ethan's shoulder. "What kind of response?" William explained the changes the medical team had observed, keeping his language simple enough for Ethan to understand. "The doctors don't know why this happened, now after all this time. But it happened right after you were with her." Ethan looked down at his hands. "I held her hand," he admitted, "and I drew her picture, not how she looks now, but how I think she used to look." William's interest sharpened. "May I see this drawing?" Ethan hesitated, then slid off his chair and retrieved his sketchbook from his backpack. He flipped through several pages before finding the drawing in question. With obvious reluctance, he placed the open sketchbook on the table in front of William. The businessman's hands trembled slightly as he looked at the image. There on the page was Olivia, not as she currently lay in the hospital bed, but as she had been before the eye. Accident. Her eyes sparkled with life, her smile radiant, her posture suggesting movement caught in a moment of time. It was remarkably accurate, down to the small birthmark near her left eyebrow that was usually concealed by makeup. "How?" William whispered, looking from the drawing to Ethan with undisguised wonder. "You couldn't have known what she looked like before. This is exactly her, exactly as she was." Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable with the intensity of William's gaze. "I just drew what I saw inside my head." Sarah watched this exchange with growing unease. "Mr. Blackwood, what exactly are you hoping for here? Ethan is just a child, not some kind of miracle worker." William straightened, composing himself. "Of course. I'm not suggesting anything supernatural, Ms. Reynolds, but your son managed to connect with my daughter in a way that somehow triggered a response. The medical team believes that further interaction might continue this positive trend." He turned, his attention back to Ethan. "Would you be willing to visit Olivia again, just to sit with her, perhaps talk to her or draw more pictures? The hospital staff would be present the entire time, and your mother as well, of course." Before Sarah could object, Ethan spoke up. "I want to help her," he said simply. "She's been sleeping too long." William's expression softened with gratitude. "Thank you, Ethan." He turned to Sarah, who still looked skeptical. "I understand your concerns, Ms. Reynolds. You have every right to be protective of your son, but I'm asking for your help, one parent to another." Sarah studied William's face, seeing beyond the power and wealth to the desperate father beneath. "I'll need to be present for any visits," she said finally, "and Ethan's schoolwork can't suffer." William nodded immediately. "Absolutely. I can arrange for a car to bring you both to the hospital after school hours, and of course, I'll compensate you for your time away from work." Sarah stiffened. "We don't need your charity, Mr. Blackwood." William recognized his misstep immediately. "I apologize, I didn't mean to imply. It's just that I understand this arrangement would impact your work schedule, and I don't want you to face financial hardship as a result." Sarah's expression remained guarded, but she nodded curtly. "We'll discuss those details later. When do you want us to come to the hospital?" "Today, if possible," William replied, unable to completely hide his eagerness. "The sooner, the better." 2 hours later, Sarah and Ethan found themselves in the back of a luxury SUV with tinted windows, heading toward Mercy Grace Hospital. Ethan had been excused from school for the day, and Sarah had reluctantly accepted William's offer to compensate her for the missed work hours. The car pulled into a private entrance at the rear of the hospital, away from the usual patient and visitor traffic. An elevator whisked them directly to the 14th floor, where Dr. Matthews was waiting. "Thank you for coming," she said warmly, shaking Sarah's hand and smiling at Ethan. "I'm Dr. Matthews, Olivia's primary physician. I understand this is an unusual situation, but we're very interested in seeing whether your presence has any further effect on Olivia's condition, Ethan." Sarah kept a protective hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Will this be safe for my son? I don't want him exposed to anything harmful or traumatic." Dr. Matthews nodded understandingly. "Completely safe. Olivia's condition is stable, and there's nothing contagious or dangerous about her situation. Ethan will simply be sitting beside her bed, perhaps talking to her or drawing, as he did yesterday." She led them down the corridor to Olivia's room, explaining that William was already inside. When they entered, they found him in his usual position beside Olivia's bed, holding her hand. He stood as they approached, his expression a mixture of hope and anxiety. "Thank you for coming," he said again, gesturing to comfortable chairs that had been arranged near the bed. "Please make yourselves at home." Sarah noted the luxury of the room: fresh flowers, original artwork on the walls, plush furniture. That seemed more appropriate for a high-end hotel than a hospital. The contrast with the sterile, utilitarian medical facilities she was accustomed to was stark. Ethan, however, paid no attention to the surroundings. His focus was entirely on Olivia. He approached her bedside with the same natural confidence he had shown the day before, stopping opposite William. "Hello, Olivia," he said softly. "I came back to see you." For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Olivia's eyelids fluttered, not opening but definitely moving. Dr. Matthews stepped forward immediately, checking the monitors. "Definite increase in brain activity," she reported. her professional tone unable to completely mask her excitement, and pupillary response to light. William gripped the edge of the bed, hardly daring to believe what he was seeing. "Keep talking. Tell her, Ethan," he encouraged, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan pulled his sketchbook from his backpack and opened it to a blank page. "I'm going to draw you another picture," he told Olivia, settling into a chair close to the bed. "This one is of the park near my school. There are ducks in the pond and sometimes they let me feed them." As he spoke, his pencil moved across the paper, capturing the scene he described. The adults in the room watched in amazed silence as Olivia's monitoring equipment registered increasing responsiveness. Her right index finger twitched, then her hand moved slightly, as though searching for something to hold. Instinctively, Ethan placed his small hand in hers. What happened next would later be described by Dr. Matthews as medically unprecedented. Olivia's fingers closed around Ethan's hand, a weak grip, but unmistakably intentional. A single tear slid from the corner of her closed eye, trailing down her cheek. William made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "Olivia," he whispered, taking her other hand. "Can you hear me, sweetheart?" Her head turned slightly toward. The sound of his voice, another deliberate movement that sent the monitoring equipment into a flurry of activity. Dr. Matthews pressed the call button, summoning additional medical staff. "This is remarkable," she said, checking Olivia's pupil response again. "She's showing signs of emerging consciousness." The next hour passed in a blur of activity as doctors and specialists examined Olivia, running tests and documenting every response. Ethan remained by her side throughout, seemingly unfazed by the commotion around him. He continued drawing and talking softly to Olivia about ordinary things, his school, his favorite foods, the stray cat that visited their apartment window. Whenever the medical staff allowed it, he held her hand, and each time she responded with a slight squeeze. By late afternoon, Olivia had not fully regained consciousness, but she had demonstrated more responsiveness than at any point since her accident. Dr. Matthews finally suggested that Ethan and Sarah should go home and rest. "This has been an extraordinary day," she told them, "but it's important not to overwhelm Olivia's system. Small, consistent interactions might be more beneficial than one intense session." William walked them to the elevator, still visibly emotional from the day's events. "I don't know how to thank you," he said to Sarah, then looked down at Ethan. "Both of you. Today has given me more hope than I've had in 3 years." Sarah, who had watched the entire scene with a mixture of wonder and uncertainty, squeezed Ethan's shoulder. "My son has always been special," she said quietly, "though I never imagined it would be like this." William hesitated, then asked, "Would you be willing to bring him back tomorrow, and perhaps regularly over the coming weeks? I know it's a lot to ask, but—" "We'll come," Sarah replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "After school tomorrow, and we can work out a schedule that doesn't interfere with his education." As they rode the elevator down to the lobby, Ethan looked up at his mother. "She's going to wake up," he said with complete confidence. "She just needed someone to find her in the dark." Sarah stared at her son, a chill running down her spine at his words. "What do you mean, honey?" Ethan shrugged, unable to articulate the certainty he felt. "She was lost somewhere far away, but now she knows how to come back." Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan visited Olivia every day after school. Each session brought new progress, a finger movement here, an eye flutter there. By the end of the second week, she was opening her eyes for brief periods, though doctors were unsure how much she comprehended of her surroundings. William rarely left the hospital during this time, sleeping in a recliner in Olivia's room and conducting business via video conference when necessary. He ordered meals for Sarah and Ethan whenever they visited, gradually breaking down Sarah's initial resistance to accepting anything from him. A tentative friendship began to form between the billionaire and the single mother, two people from vastly different worlds, united by concern for their children. The medical staff continued to monitor Olivia's progress with cautious optimism. Dr. Chen developed a specialized rehabilitation program based on her responses to Ethan's presence, incorporating elements of music therapy, physical stimulation, and cognitive exercises. But everyone involved recognized that the most significant factor in her improvement remained the quiet boy with the sketchbook. On the 17th day after Ethan's first official visit, something extraordinary happened. Ethan was sitting beside Olivia's bed as usual, drawing and chatting about his day at school, when he felt her hand tighten around his. He looked up to find her eyes open and focused directly on him. Not the vacant stare they had sometimes seen before, but a gaze of recognition and awareness. "Hello," she said, her voice a raspy whisper after years of disuse. Ethan smiled, completely unsurprised, as though he had been expecting this moment all along. "Hello, Olivia," he replied. "I'm Ethan. I've been waiting for you to wake up." The news of Olivia Blackwood's awakening spread through Mercy Grace Hospital like wildfire. Medical staff who had cared for her over the years stopped by her room to witness the miracle for themselves. Dr. Matthews and Dr. Chen worked tirelessly to document every aspect of her remarkable recovery, aware that they were observing a case that defied conventional medical understanding. William Blackwood, who had maintained iron control over his emotions for 3 long years, finally allowed himself to break down when Olivia spoke his name for the first time since the accident. "Dad," she had whispered, her hand reaching weakly for his. "Have I been asleep?" In that moment, the powerful businessman was simply a father again, gathering his daughter's frail hand in both of his and pressing it to his cheek, wet with tears. "Yes, sweetheart," he managed to say, "but you're awake now, that's all that matters." Recovery, however, was not instantaneous. Olivia's muscles had atrophied despite the physical therapy she had received while comatose. Her cognitive functions, while remarkably intact given the circumstances, showed gaps and inconsistencies. She tired easily, often drifting back to sleep mid-conversation, but the medical team was unanimous in their assessment. Her progress was nothing short of miraculous. Throughout it all, Ethan remained a constant presence. He visited every day after school, bringing new drawings and stories that seemed to anchor Olivia to the waking world. There was something about his quiet, accepting presence that calmed her when she became frustrated with her limitations or confused about the passage of time. 3 years, she had asked in disbelief when finally told how long she had been unconscious. "That's impossible. It feels like yesterday that I was—" She trailed off, unable to recall the moments before her accident. William and the doctors had agreed not to pressure her about those memories, allowing them to return naturally if they would. As June turned to July, Olivia's strength increased steadily. She progressed from being barely able to lift her head to sitting up in bed unassisted. Physical therapists worked with her daily, rebuilding muscle tone and coordination. Speech therapists helped her overcome the slight slurring that sometimes affected her words. Cognitive specialists monitored her mental recovery, amazed at how much of her personality and memories remained intact. One warm afternoon, when Olivia had been awake for nearly a month, she asked to go outside. "Just for a little while," she pleaded with Dr. Matthews. "I need to feel the sun on my face." After consulting with the medical team, Dr. Matthews agreed to a brief excursion to the hospital's rooftop garden, a space usually reserved for staff, but which offered privacy and security. William arranged for a wheelchair and a small entourage of medical personnel to accompany them. As an afterthought, he called Sarah to ask if Ethan could join them for this milestone. When they reached the garden, Olivia's face transformed with joy as she tilted her head back to feel the sunshine. "It's so beautiful," she whispered, drinking in the sight of the sky, the carefully tended plants, the panoramic view of Boston spread out before them. "I had dreams about the sun, but I'd forgotten how warm it feels." Ethan sat beside her on a stone bench, sketchbook open on his lap. As always, he seemed to understand intuitively what Olivia needed, not conversation or activity, but simply quiet companionship as she reacquainted herself with the sensations of the outside world. William stood a short distance away with Sarah, watching their children with a mixture of wonder and gratitude. "I still don't understand it," he admitted quietly. "The doctors have run every test imaginable, and they can't explain why Ethan's presence triggered her recovery when nothing else did. Sarah watched her son, who was now showing Olivia a drawing he had made of the Boston skyline. "My mother used to talk about people with healing hands," she said hesitantly. "In her village in El Salvador, there was a child who could ease pain with a touch. Most people dismissed it as superstition, but my mother believed." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I never thought much about it until Ethan was born. He was always different, more sensitive, more intuitive than other children. When he was 5, he found an injured bird in our yard. The poor thing looked like it wouldn't survive the hour. But Ethan held it in his hands, just talking to it softly, and by evening it was strong enough to fly away." William considered this in silence. 3 years ago, he would have dismissed such a story as irrational nonsense, but after witnessing Olivia's inexplicable awakening, he found himself more open to possibilities beyond his understanding. "Whatever the explanation," he said finally, "I'm eternally grateful that your son found his way to my daughter's room that day." As July progressed, discussions began about Olivia's eventual discharge from the hospital. Her recovery, while still ongoing, had reached a point where continued hospitalization was no longer medically necessary. William immediately began renovations to their home, transforming the ground floor into a rehabilitation space with all the equipment and accommodations Olivia would need. He hired a team of live-in specialists to continue her therapy and ensure her comfort during the transition. Through it all, he made sure that Ethan remained part of Olivia's recovery plan. "The doctors may not understand his role in all this," he told Sarah, "but I'm not taking any chances. If Ethan's presence helps Olivia, then he's welcome in our home any time." Sarah, who had initially been wary of William's wealth and power, found herself warming to the man behind the empire. His genuine concern for his daughter and his gratitude toward Ethan revealed a depth of character she hadn't expected. For his part, William came to respect Sarah's fierce independence and unwavering dedication to her son. Their friendship deepened as they navigated the unique circumstances that had brought their families together. As plans for Olivia's homecoming took shape, William approached Sarah with a proposition. "I've been thinking," he began hesitantly, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Your apartment is quite far from our home, which would make Ethan's visits difficult once Olivia is discharged. And I understand the building has had some structural issues recently." Sarah's expression closed immediately. "We're managing just fine, thank you." William held up his hands placatingly. "I'm not offering charity. I'm proposing a practical solution. There's a guest house on my property, completely separate from the main house, with its own entrance and privacy. It's sitting empty, and it would make Ethan's visits to Olivia much more convenient." Seeing Sarah's continued resistance, he added, "Think of it as an exchange. You and Ethan provide something invaluable to Olivia, and in return you have a comfortable place to live, near enough to make the arrangement sustainable." Sarah hesitated, torn between pride and practicality. Their apartment building was indeed deteriorating, with frequent water leaks and electrical problems. The commute to William's suburban estate would be exhausting if they remained there, and she couldn't deny the positive effect the friendship with Olivia was having on her son, who had always struggled to connect with peers his own age. "I would pay rent," she insisted, "a fair market value." William smiled, recognizing the compromise. "Of course, we can have an independent assessor determine the appropriate amount." What he didn't mention was his intention to establish a scholarship fund for Ethan's education, not as charity, but as recognition of the boy's extraordinary gifts and potential. On a perfect August morning, Olivia Blackwood left Mercy Grace Hospital for the first time in more than 3 years. The media had gotten wind of the story despite William's efforts at privacy, and a small crowd of reporters gathered at the hospital's private exit. William had anticipated this and arranged for a decoy vehicle, while Olivia was quietly transported in an unmarked van with tinted windows. Dr. Matthews and Dr. Chen accompanied them to oversee the transition, along with 2 nurses who had been part of Olivia's care team from the beginning. Sarah and Ethan were already waiting at the Blackwood estate when they arrived. Ethan had spent the previous day helping to decorate Olivia's new room with drawings he had made especially for her. Scenes of the outside world she was finally rejoining, filled with color and life. "Welcome home," Ethan said simply when Olivia was settled in her new space. Olivia smiled, reaching for his hand with a strength that increased daily. "It's strange," she admitted. "I don't really remember this house. Dad says we moved here after my freshman year of college, but that was after." She still struggled to recall the details surrounding her accident. "That doesn't matter now," Ethan assured her, with the straightforward wisdom that sometimes made him seem older than his years. "You're making new memories." Over the following weeks, Sarah and Ethan moved into the guest house on the Blackwood estate. True to his word, William had an independent assessor determine a fair rent, which Sarah insisted on paying promptly each month. She continued her work at the nursing home, now with a significantly shorter commute, while Ethan enrolled in a nearby public school for the upcoming academic year. Olivia's recovery continued to exceed all medical expectations. By September, she was walking short distances with the aid of a walker. Her speech had returned to normal, and her cognitive tests showed remarkable improvement. There were still gaps in her memory, particularly surrounding the accident, but Dr. Matthews assured her that this was not uncommon with traumatic brain injuries. "Some memories may never return," she explained during a follow-up appointment. "The brain sometimes protects itself by sealing off traumatic experiences." Olivia nodded, having come to terms with this possibility. "I'm not sure I need to remember everything," she said thoughtfully. "Maybe some things are better left in the past." As autumn painted the trees surrounding the Blackwood estate in brilliant reds and golds, William called a meeting with Dr. Matthews, Dr. Chen, and several other specialists who had been involved in Olivia's care. "I want to establish a foundation," he announced, "a center for research and treatment of consciousness disorders, with a particular focus on integrating emotional and social connections into traditional medical approaches." The doctors exchanged intrigued glances. Dr. Chen was the first to respond. "You're thinking of replicating the conditions of Olivia's recovery for other patients?" William nodded. "Exactly. We still don't understand precisely why Ethan's presence catalyzed Olivia's awakening, but that doesn't mean we can't apply what we've learned. Human connection, art, storytelling. These elements were crucial to her recovery, yet they're often overlooked in standard medical protocols." Dr. Matthews leaned forward, excited by the possibility. "A holistic approach that incorporates both cutting-edge medical technology and human-centered healing practices. It's an intriguing concept." "More than intriguing," William insisted. "Necessary. How many patients like Olivia are lying in hospitals right now, their families told to give up hope because conventional medicine has reached its limits?" Over the following months, the Blackwood Foundation for Consciousness Recovery took shape. William donated a significant portion of his fortune to establish the initial endowment and purchased a large property adjacent to Mercy Grace Hospital for the physical facility. Dr. Chen agreed to leave Stanford to serve as the foundation's director of research, while Dr. Matthews would oversee the clinical program. By the spring of the following year, construction was underway on what would become a world-class center for the treatment of consciousness disorders. The design incorporated not only state-of-the-art medical facilities, but also spaces specifically designed for art therapy, music rooms, gardens, and areas where patients could interact with visitors in comfortable home-like settings rather than sterile hospital environments. On a personal level, the connection between the Blackwood and Reynolds families continued to deepen. Olivia, now walking independently and regaining her strength daily, took a keen interest in Ethan's education. She helped him with homework, introduced him to books that had inspired her own love of learning, and encouraged his artistic talents. In turn, Ethan's presence seemed to accelerate Olivia's recovery in ways that continued to baffle the medical team. William, observing this extraordinary bond, privately established a trust for Ethan's education, structured as a formal scholarship program that Sarah, with her fierce pride, would find acceptable. Sarah herself found unexpected friendship with William, their vastly different backgrounds becoming a source of perspective rather than division. When the Blackwood Foundation officially opened its doors in June, exactly 1 year after Ethan's fateful visit to Olivia's hospital room, the media clamored for the full story. William, protective of both his daughter's privacy and Ethan's childhood, declined most interview requests. Instead, he issued a simple statement. The Blackwood Foundation represents our family's commitment to advancing medical understanding of consciousness disorders and supporting patients and families on their journey toward recovery. Our approach combines rigorous science with the healing power of human connection, because sometimes the most profound breakthroughs come from the simplest gestures. On the day of the Foundation's opening ceremony, Olivia stood beside her father at the podium, something that would have seemed impossible 18 months earlier. She spoke briefly but powerfully about her experience, without revealing the personal details of her recovery. "I was lost in darkness for a very long time," she told the assembled guests and media representatives. "What brought me back wasn't just medicine, though I'm eternally grateful for my extraordinary medical team. It was human connection, a hand holding mine, a voice calling me back, someone who somehow found me when I was lost." Her gaze found Ethan in the front row, sitting between Sarah and his new art teacher from the prestigious school where William's scholarship had secured him a place. He smiled at her, that same quiet, knowing smile that had first appeared when he entered her hospital room. After the ceremony, as guests mingled in the Foundation's sunlit atrium, Olivia and Ethan slipped away to a quiet corner garden. "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" Olivia asked. "The first day when you found me in the hospital?" Ethan nodded. "I said you looked lonely." "I was," Olivia confirmed, "but it was more than that. I think I was waiting for someone to find me, and somehow out of everyone in the world you did." Ethan considered this with his usual thoughtfulness. "I think people find each other when they're supposed to," he said finally, "like you and me." Olivia smiled, taking his hand in the same gesture that had first connected them. "Like you and me," she agreed. From across the atrium, William and Sarah watched their children, each reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them all together. "Do you believe in fate?" William asked quietly. Sarah considered the question. "I believe there are connections in this world that we don't fully understand," she replied. "And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to be part of something miraculous." As the Foundation welcomed its first patients in the weeks that followed, the story of Olivia's awakening became something of a legend among the staff, an inspiration and a reminder that healing often comes from unexpected sources. Ethan continued to visit regularly, not only spending time with Olivia but also sitting with other patients, drawing pictures for them, telling stories in his quiet, soothing voice. No one could explain exactly why his presence seemed to reach patients when other interventions failed, but the results were undeniable. 1 year later, the Blackwood Foundation published its first research findings, a groundbreaking study documenting the impact of emotional connection and creative expression on brain activity in comatose patients. Medical institutions around the world began implementing protocols inspired by their work, incorporating elements of human connection alongside traditional treatments. And in a quiet corner of the Foundation's garden, a simple bench bore a small